Hello and welcome back to At World's Edge, the fantasy lore podcast. Today we'll be talking about the Supreme Lord of Undeath himself, Nagash. Many of you who are more familiar with the Age of Sigmar or who didn't play End Times Warhammer Fantasy may not know the history of this character, but he has been terrorizing tabletops, painting studios, novels, and our imaginations for more than 3 decades, and the inhabitants of the world that was from millennia untold. Now, Nagash was born to King Khatep of Khemri, the greatest of the city-states that made up the kingdom of Nehekara. At the time of his birth, about 2500 pre-imperial calendar, the War of the Beard had just wound down and the great powers of the age were in retreat. The silence that permeated that world scene between the end of that conflict and the time of woes was a quiet one for a new power, and the troubles that followed meant there would be none to check it. Khemri was a theocracy, and as the firstborn son of the king, Nagash was destined for the priesthood, while his younger brother Thutep would ascend the throne. Most people in Nehekaran society would have considered this an honor. As the high priest of the mortuary cult, Nagash would have a closer relationship with the gods and be removed from the humdrum of mortal life. But these people were not Nagash. To him, this was a slight, because he knew he was destined for greatness, and as that greatness would transcend that of gods or men, why not have a title to match? After capturing and killing a cabal of dark elf sorceresses that arrived in Nehekara, Nagash learned the secrets of Dahar, or dark magic. This is a feat generally considered impossible for humans, as it requires mental fortitude and years of study beyond what is normally capable of a mortal life, as well as human brain power. But did it, he did, and being already a respected practitioner of the proto-magical incantations of the mortuary cult, Nagash was able to combine it with the higher magic of Dahar and came up with something truly unique: necromancy. Dahar magic focuses on the summoning of demons and the channeling of energy from the ether in raw form. The mortuary cult focused on binding and recovering souls from the underworld. The two combined to create magic where the souls of the dead could be pulled from the underworld and used to power spells, provide advice, or be bound into objects like bone, metal, or stone. It was also during this time that Nagash created his greatest alchemical creation, the Elixir of Life, a potion that prevented his body from being fully destroyed or his soul from passing into the afterlife. Using his abilities, Nagash murdered his brother and took control of Khemri, inaugurating a period of tyranny and violence upon the nation of Nehekara. And needless to say, his fellow priest-kings were unhappy with this turn of events. They were bound to pay tribute to Khemri by ancient rites, but Nagash abused this, both in the amount of tribute demanded and the purpose. Kings of the past expanded the empire, improved infrastructure, commissioned works, defended against enemies. But this new king was only concerned with himself and his inner circle. His focus was on constructing his Black Pyramid, a blasphemous structure that mocked tradition by not being a resting place, but a nexus for evil magics. The only course was war. Rallying the armies of 7 different kings, the Eponymous War saw the first application of necromancy on the battlefield, with living Khemrian soldiers standing step in step with their ancestors, led by powerful liches, the 9 Dark Lords of Nagash. The war was long and bloody, but it was the better led and more numerous armies of the kings smashed Khemri, murdering its people and killing Nagash's lieutenants. But he was not among the killed, and this would come back to haunt them. Journeying east to the World's Edge Mountains, the deposed monarch discovered a secret weapon, the warpstone deposits beneath Cripple Peak. Constructing his new base of operations, Nagash was preparing to take the war back to Nehekara and reclaim his birthright. He was delayed, however, by the very weapon he hoped to use. Skaven crave warpstone almost pathologically, and the discovery of the world's largest deposit was a lightning rod to the chaotic creatures. The war lasted a century, but with neither side able to gain the upper hand. Eventually a truce was made where both sides would get a share of the resource, and what followed was an uneasy alliance where both sides felt they only had to outlast the other one until the moment was ripe. So what was Nagash doing with all that warpstone? Mainly he was eating it, and not tokens like the Skaven, but as smoothies. Because his body was impossible to kill, he was able to consume amounts of this distilled substance that would have been impossible for anyone else. His body and magical power grew to immensity. He also refined his practices, creating better constructs such as artillery that fired the thighs of giants and golems of stone and metal. He created new items of power for himself, his armor Morricane and the sword Mortis, as well as his crown of sorcery. Finally, and by accident, he received new leaders to replace his 9 lost lords. The vampires of Lamia, created by the admirer of his, Neferata, arrived at Nagashazar in the dead of night, cast out of Nehekhara much as he himself had been, and they were happy to lead his armies. Happy may be strong, but they had little choice in the matter, as Nagash had bound them to his will by a magical ring, the future von Karstein ring to be exact. In any case, a second war with Nehekhara was begun, but with the centuries to learn and to grow, Nehekhara was ready. Their armies were vast, advanced, and importantly, united. The wars against Lamia had taught the kings much, and they destroyed the vampire-led armies that Nagash sent towards them. The rage of the Great Necromancer was indescribable, and the vampires were driven away. No matter, Nagash reasoned that if he could not conquer the living Nehekhara, then he would inherit a dead one. Poisoning the water and the food supply, Nagash sickened and killed the armies and weakened the people of Nehekhara. When his army swept through again, they only encountered token resistance. Carrying their broken monarch Alcatizar back to Nagashazar in chains, Nagash planned his final incantation. The gods of Nehekhara made one last attempt to stop him themselves. The sun god Pitra, furious over the deaths of his people and the capture of his earthly avatar, dispatched a heavenly host, the Khemri, to dispatch the blasphemer and save what remained of his people. Great angelic warriors with armor and weapons forged on the sun forge of Pitra himself and imbued with his might assailed Nagashazar for 40 days, and they battled with Nagash alone. They still did not prevail. In a gesture of arrogance and to show his superiority over his erstwhile pantheon, Nagash raised the corpses of the angelic warriors and sent them against his former countrymen as his new lieutenants, the Morghasts, proving himself the better of the greatest of the old gods. With his position secure physically, Nagash performed his greatest incantation yet, a spell killing all living things in Nehekhara and then raising them back under his control. The terrible effect of the incantation was felt in faraway Skavenblight, and the lords of the Council of 13 knew that the time was now if they wished to avoid destruction. Freeing Alcatizar from prison and arming him with the Fellblade, a warpstone forged sword of immense power built specifically for this task, they led him to the throne room. There Nagash was resting. His body and mind were tired from his great work, and secure in his knowledge that there was no one left to challenge him. His arrogance was, not for the last time, his undoing. Alcatizar struck down the Great Necromancer in a battle of physical and magical will that transfers time and space, striking down the Council of 13 as they used their power to shield the human king from magical attacks. Alcatizar then chopped the body into pieces and fed them into the furnaces under the tower, and as Nagash became so much dust, the world breathed a sigh of relief. The Necromancer's first death, though, was not as complete as it may have seemed. There was the matter of his crown of sorcery, which sat upon Alcatizar's head as he slunk away into the mountains. Also his claw, the largest piece of Nagash that wasn't chopped up, because it had crawled away while the rest of him was dismembered. The undead of Nehekhara were still awakened, and although released from Nagash's control, they were angry at their posthumous fate, being born not as golden-skinned gods into the afterlife, but waking up inside their tombs as skeletal monstrosities. Finally, the 9 books of Nagash, penned by Nagash himself on the pages of human skin, were taken by the vampire Wusuran up far into the north. The elixir of life which Nagash had made so long ago, it made it impossible to destroy him by normal means. Essentially, his ashes coalesced into black goop, which pulled itself physically towards the sarcophagus he had created in the Black Pyramid. Over a century, his body was reformed, bones, muscles, veins, and skin, until his spirit was able to return to his mortal form. Emerging from the structure, though, was not the triumphant return he had expected. His body was uncovered by warpstone, and it was as weak as it was when he was mortal. He was unbolstered by the equipment he had forged for himself, and he had no undead servants. The Morghasts were long silenced as his magic was no longer able to support them, and the awakened Tomb Kings were hostile at best. Nagash was forced to flee his home for a third time and journey across the world to recover what was his. His travels took him first to Nagashazar, where he slew in one night the entire Skaven population that had taken up residence there. But his old home was effectively worthless now, with the warpstone gone, so he followed the trail of Alcatizar north, hoping to recover his lost crown. As he went, he witnessed a world change from what he remembered. Dwarves and orcs fought for control of the mountains, and new human nations were rising in the lands north of the Black Mountains. Here it was that he met his greatest foe, Sigmar Heldenhammer. The young human chieftain had come into possession of his crown, and Nagash needed it. he would come and take it himself. After all, he had laid waste to the greatest kingdom of men in the world, and surely this underpopulated tribe of fur-wearing savages would prove no trouble. Calling to him vampires and wights, as well as the dead of areas he passed through, Nagash amassed a massive army that assailed the burgeoning empire and its dwarf allies. Militarily, there was no question. Nagash was winning, but he was undone in the end by his own arrogance and short-sightedness, as Sigmar tricked the old king into dropping his guard before destroying him utterly with the runic hammer Galmaraz. The second death was not as easy to recover from. His body did knit itself back together, and was deposited in Nagash's Ar, but a curse laid in the runes of the Fellblade meant his spirit would weaken with each subsequent rebirth, and Nagash was unable to fully inhabit his body again. Indeed, for more than 2,500 years, the Great Necromancer was little more than a voice on the wind and an ancient terrible memory. But a voice on the wind is sometimes all you need. The Lord of Undeath maneuvered his pieces expertly, bringing the various streams of Undeath together to both revive him and provide the power necessary to overcome the curse of the Skaven. After an epic quest to retrieve the ingredients needed, his staff, armor, books, and holy sacrifices, two ancient enemies, Archon the Black and Manfred von Karstein, united at the Nine Demons in Sylvania, and even under threat by armies of dwarves, elves, and empire, pulled the spirit of Nagash not into his old body, which is likely still in Nagash's Ar, but into a new one, that of the Grand Theogonist, Volkmar the Grim. Essentially, his resurrection was harnessing the purple wind of magic, Sheesh, and funneling it not into the vortex of Ulthuan, but into his own body. The schemes of Teclis and a subsequent failure of the resurrection made this impossible, as the new body, while not having the curse of the Fellblade, was still too weak to hold the entire wind of magic. Instead, he grounded the magic directly into the land of Sylvania, intending to retrieve it when he was rid of the curse. To do that, he would need the power of a god, and he knew where to find it. Even without the wind of Sheesh, Nagash was a power beyond measure, and he immediately began reassembling his 9 lords, now Mortarchs from a pantheon of Undeath from throughout the world. It was these that would lead his army south and protect the north from a growing chaos threat. Working his way down the spine of the World's Edge Mountains, Nagash got his first taste of godly energy when he absorbed the soul and body of Valea, the ancestor goddess of the dwarves. That was only a snack, though. The dwarves were nearly extinct as a people, and Valea's worship had never been as vibrant as that of Grungni or Grimnir. He needed more, and to do that he would come back to the place where it all began, Khemri. Though the military campaign through the lands of the dead was brutal and grinding, it was ultimately due to fail against the power of Setra, the Khemri-Kara, first and greatest of the Tomb Kings. However, that was merely a distraction, as Nagash needed the armies of Khemri drawn out and distracted while he made his true path to a passage that would lead to the underworld and its protector Usirian. Known by many names, the faceless god was the guardian of the underworld and keeper of souls. His power was weakened in recent years, but was still terrible and vast. It was only in an immense struggle, the likes of which would not replay again until Sigmar battled the zodiacal beasts of the mortal realms, that Nagash broke and consumed the old god, and became in name and face the god of Undeath. His purpose achieved, the once king struck down the last Tomb King resistance and destroyed his old home, raising back only his Black Pyramid into the sky and marching it, along with his impossibly vast army, north. While Nagash would fall against the inevitable coming of chaos and the end of the world that was, he would not die, and his body and spirit would be reborn again into the mortal realms as the undisputed god of death. Now, Nagash is and has been a character in the Warhammer world for millennia, and is one of the oldest and most powerful beings ever to exist. He predates Sigmar, Tyrion, Teclis in the Age of Sigmar, and is only younger than Malerion, Morathi, and the surviving Slann. He's more vastly powerful than any of those single entities. Despite all of this, though, he remains a spoiled, jealous child, forever hampered by his own insecurities. His mistrustful nature and general antipathy will always leave him exposed and friendless, and maybe that's how he likes it. As famous as Nagash is his panoply of war, his sword Mortis, the staff Alakanash, the armor Morricaine, the crown of sorcery, and the books of Nagash. These are not only tools, but like Horcruxes from Harry Potter or the Rings of Power from Lord of the Rings, hold a portion of his spirit and energy within them. which they can bestow on a bearer or used by Nagash himself to magnify his own powers. The places of power of Nagash are as integral to his story as he is, whether it's the storied fortress of Nagashizar, which is said to have raised a mile over the surface of the world and 1.5 miles beneath it, was protected by more than just walls. It was also protected by bone and stone golems, by bolt throwers that threw the thighs of giants as the missiles, and by an untold legion of undead skeletal servants. Plus, the living servants of Nagash, who inhabited the little villages around it. The Black Pyramid, whose existence was both a political statement, rejecting the values of the Nehekarans, and acting as a locus of necromantic power, is a symbol that has continued to exist not only in the old world, but also in the mortal realms themselves. Thank you all for joining me today. I look forward to making more videos for you. Please leave comments below, and remember to like, share, and subscribe.